Welcome back to Animal Songs, a story set to music, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb. I hate to break up a chapter. I'm a purist when it comes to incantations. Regardless, here we are, in the middle of the woods, wondering whether or not we will encounter... Well, what will we encounter? Sit back, relax, and watch the show. In your head, on screen, through the dots of your own eyes. A nightlight on the darkest day. Shut your eyes and see. Initiation. Bat. I had crashed the ship. It was because of me. Now I was lost in these woods and night was fast approaching. Maybe they'll consume me, I said aloud, almost daring the forest. I'm not afraid. But I shuddered at my own footfall. The canopy grew thicker, the light darker, and the only sounds were the dry leavings crunching beneath me and the occasional call of a distant bird. Suddenly I heard a voice creak. Who goes there? Who's asking? I said, and I lowered into a defensive crouch. From behind a tree stepped a long-bearded old man in purple robes. Shiny magenta skull cap covered his head and framed his fierce face. His bushy arched eyebrows scowled above golden-ringed eyes with sharp penetrating pupils like a hunting hawk. I am here, he said. I will ask the questions. I made a mistake, I said. Now I'm lost. A mistake. He stroked his chin, revealing an enormous thumb with a whorled knuckle like a tree stump and a single bony pointer finger. He tugged his beard, and I could see a flat strap of black leather across the remainder of his hand where the fingers were missing. What's the problem? I'm responsible for... All I could see was Fitzsimmons' bulging fish eyes and bloated gray cheeks. All of them, he said, and his scowl turned to a look of amazement. He stared into space, and I turned, trying to find what he saw. He threw up his hands and said, whoosh. He let his fingertips fall apart like fireworks. Then he laughed and slapped me on the shoulder. What a wild ride. They're all dead, I said, because I didn't need to ask the sorcerer what he had just done. I could feel him, his presence just above my left eyebrow. Don't use your tricks on me. I'm just passing through. I'm trying to get on with my life. There's no point in that. Your life is happening regardless of your actions. Now I am here. He spread his arms out and turned his hands to indicate his own body. You have to deal with me. I don't want anything to do with you. I ended up in these woods, and this is not where I want to be. But you made a mistake. You were here. Now you have to deal with me. Again he modeled his form, and as he leaned back, a breeze nudged his beard aside so that I could see in the center of his robe was a black square bearing a red emblem, an outline of a winged skull. Okay, who are you? The sun, he screamed and ran around wildly. Laughing, he squatted at my feet like a dog, tongue lolling, and he waved his 7 fingers in my face. You're insane, I said, and I quickly walked away from him. Crawling on all fours, he followed me. Think of the crash again, he said. That was really interesting. It was the most horrible moment of my life, though now I've met you, so life goes on. Why'd you do it? Stop. Try as I might, I couldn't help recalling myself lying in my hammock, dagger in hand, whittling a lovely scale pattern. I've seen that, he said, and he transformed into a mermaid. Now, I knew this was only a trick, and probably this image was being projected into my mind by an old man lying on his side with his hand behind his head. But this woman, her red hair, her electric blue tail, which was so much more human than I had imagined, and her seashelled bosom beckoned me with the inevitable force of a magnet. Be reasonable, I told myself through gritted teeth. She threw back her head and laughed. The old man jumped to his feet and dusted off his robes. How did you do that? I rubbed my right temple and blinked repeatedly. He laughed again with the woman's voice. I could feel my skin break out in goose pimples and my face flush. Now, said the wizard, you're going to deal with me. He turned around and crunched back into the woods. What could I do? I followed him. The mermaid I never wanted to see again. Her beauty was made all the more alluring by the horrible truth beneath her form. The fact of the ridiculous old man behind the image posed a compelling question. Would you? There was a simultaneous what if. He felt disgusted imagining the old man, and he was scalier and hairier every time, but that mermaid was everything your heart desired. Then there were the inevitable associations with your crime. Why had you crashed the ship upon the shore? Stop, I cursed the old man. Told you not to use your tricks on me. At this moment, the man squatted over a bed of toadstools and strained his face. He spread his legs wide. You've got to be. I turned away, wincing. When I looked back, the old man stood smiling before a gigantic beehive-shaped building. "Welcome to my home," he said, and he turned the brass knob and opened the circular oaken door to a quaint apartment sparkling with silver furniture, carpets, and walls. "Remember when you were a boy and you would climb into bed with your mother in the early morning when it was still dark and you would shut your eyes and see the rainbow dots that you knew were really the surface of your own eyes? Won't you come in? Who are you?" The sorcerer didn't answer, but he motioned for me to sit on his glittering ivory couch. I said, "Look, I wasn't too impressed with your mind reading. Carnival mentalists can pull off wilder stunts, and you could have easily discovered the shipwreck during the night while I was unconscious. For all I know, I have you to thank for dragging me onto the beach." I frowned and slowly sat upright. "For leading me to it." I realized that I had never sat down to begin with and cursed the old man. "I wasn't the mermaids," he said, and he shut the door. "That was the moon." He looked upwards at his ivory ceiling and shook his head. "You killed them all for the moon." I was desperate, obsessed. With a fantasy, creature, are there any human women where you come from? His eyes went wide as we both recalled the raven-haired classmate who I'd often looked at from afar. "What is this incredible trick?" "I'll give you a clue." He rushed over to sit next to me, and I could smell on his robes a faint tinge of sage. He said nothing and then motioned for me to understand that this odor had been his sign. "It's a smell organ." He grinned, and extending his left arm, he reached his right hand into the wide, drooping sleeve and produced an instrument consisting of a metal spine lined with 4 rubber pouches, red, yellow, blue, and green. "Ever seen one of these before? They're a hoot." He snapped his fingers and the device disappeared. Beyond baffled, I asked him why he'd created this thing only to destroy it, with a power exceptionally more profound than the ridiculous invention. "Because it's not funny," he said, scowling. "Was it funny when you crashed the ship upon the shore?" "Oh yeah," he started laughing. Whoosh. He repeated his explosion gesture, releasing his fingertips like falling fireworks. Then he set his 2-fingered hand around my shoulder like a pincer and looked very apologetic, shaking his head as he said, "They were the dots of your own eyes." "Why are you doing this?" I tugged away from him and stood. He just smiled up at me innocently. "Because you're here, and this is fun." I ran to the door and I had my hand around the cold knob. I could smell the yellow brass. I remembered 100 doorknobs instantly, but the chief image was the marine chafed handle of the gate to the beach outside my grandmother's house. "She made all this possible," said the wizard. "I'll show you how." "How what?" I slowly turned back. "My trick." He waved a hand in contemplation and continued. "What's the catch?" He smiled and turned his hands once again on himself. "You have to deal with me." Why am I doing this? I asked myself. Just like that, the brass doorknob slipped through my fingers. It stretched like molten metal. At the same time, the wooden door spread over the glistening walls, transforming the space into an oak-paneled room. Then the walls turned in impossible dimensions. They became aisles, bookshelves filled with musty hardcovers I could smell. I spun around and saw the wizard already squatting on a rectangular table. The couch was gone. And smiling, he rolled his eyes and he started to shrink. As he became smaller, his face turned darker, his skin buckled and popped, and his body flattened. His robes turned the same burgundy color as his face, while his piercing hawk's eyes flashed all the more golden. I was caught in his gaze. Those eyes contorted in the same impossible dimensions as the walls, and then they separated and twisted like dissolving strands of protein or smoke. Like that, I was standing in the university library in Boston, holding a small copy of the Persian hymnal. The lettering on its cover sparkled and seemed to be winking. On an impulse, I tilted the book to see its spine. At the bottom, where the publisher's mark should be stamped, there was the wizard's crest, the winged skull, now in gold. "I'm seriously not in control," I said. Instantly, the room filled with a hissing sound. I jumped and turned to see the librarian, a frizzy-haired crone I remembered well, and her assistant, a plump, sloppy graduate student dutifully pushing his rickety cart. Both scowled at me, each with a finger pressed to their lips. The book in my hands laughed, but neither of my accusers seemed to hear it. "Sorry," I mumbled. "Just like that," said the book. It curled its covers like lips, and the whole thing bent, a sign I understood to be a nod in the direction of the librarian and assistant receding into the stacks. "They're gone." I hurled the book away. It landed somewhere out of sight, grunting. Frantically, I looked around at the bookshelves that bordered this reading area. For whatever reason, my eye caught a dark red plastic-wrapped collection of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, peeking out from the end of a shelf. I had seen it sitting there many times, and though I had never read it, the book had always spoken to me. Often I had sat at this exact table and looked up from my notebook and encyclopedia to spot the little red volume perching like a finch in a forest canopy. Suddenly, the green carpet and distant teal-painted walls leapt out at me. I noticed the high arched windows and their view of a stormy New England sky over the scraggly black trees peppering the snow-covered campus lawn. I was really here. Had I ever left? Shivering, I pulled out a chair, familiar blonde wood with a seat cushion that matched the mottled green carpet below. I saw my arm wrapped in a white sleeve, the cotton hoodie I'd loved so well during this time of my life. My lower half was covered by faded jeans, the bad pair that were too loose around the waist and too tight across my hips. I sat at the table and patted the surface, feeling its solidity, its coldness. On an impulse, out of some deep muscle memory, I turned to my right and looked down. Curled against the legs of the table was my trusty army green backpack. I sighed relief, though the sudden presence of this object was just another nail in the coffin. I had gone insane. I'd never left my seat in the library where I had dreamed myself a life, which was quickly slipping from my memory. I had crashed my ship upon a shore, where I had entered a forest and met a mad wizard. Again, on instinct, perhaps out of a need for a security blanket, I picked up my bag, and it was reassuring to feel the thick ridges of the well-knit nylon fabric, and opened it. Inside lay my Dalmatian skin composition notebook and white wax candle, but between them, horribly smiling with its gold lettering, sat the Persian hymnal. After I'd poked my head outside to ensure that I was in the real library and not the wizard's beehive building in the woods, seeing no other source for answers, I turned to my books. I dreaded the shape-shifting hymnal, and I thought I might find something more stable to grasp in my own notebook. Perhaps some quotation would help me to fix my position and remember where I was in my life, and possibly to foresee what would happen next, if any of my muddled memories had happened at all. I sat at the reading table, which every now and then seemed to glint like the ivory couch, and I spread the composition notebook before me. It was a comfort to hold this faithful companion, which I remembered storing in a filing cabinet somewhere sometime before I'd set sail. Now we were together, though I was disturbed to discover that the pages were only half full, which meant that I was a long way from the filing cabinet. Earlier in my life I had recalled dreams which I couldn't distinguish from waking memories, or so I thought. I turned back from the blank pages to my last scribbles directly in the center of the journal. They looked something like this. If you're still with me, then bravo, your mind is of supple hue, a vessel fit for even the harshest conditions. You may recall the fairest latinate thoughts, often always viewed from afar, peering down at you with italic eyes, expressive but ineffable and deliberately kept mysterious. There's not much in the simple mind, but even a shaker of salt and pepper is complicated in its particulars. Variety is a spice of life, so there are some things you know and some things you don't. Isn't it more beautiful to leave it that way? Why shine a flashlight on every secret corner? Why, then you'd live in a fluorescent world that may as well look like this. Below these words, I, presumably, had drawn an arrow pointing to the right, which I interpreted as an indication to turn the page. There was nothing there. I read my notes again and understood that I was indicating this empty white space as my so-called fluorescent world. Thoughtlessly, my eyes flew to the stacks where the bright red copy of Meditations poked out. Ferris, I thought, not Auric. I still had the journal open to the blank page, and when I returned from these thoughts to look down, in the center of the page, where there had certainly been nothing, in my own jagged handwriting stood this sign, I-O. As this symbol struck me, unbidden, unwelcome, and in that creaky voice I heard, Ferris-bound Auric thought, the better to hear you with. I see, I mumbled. Thoroughly frustrated and completely out of my element, I resigned myself to open the Persian hymnal. Once upon a time, the book began, and I gulped. These were not the opening words that I remembered. I was caught in the wizard's spell, and he was speaking to me. The story continued. There was a little boy called Crystal Clearhood. Had he lived around other children, he would surely have been bullied mercilessly for his ridiculous name, but as it was, he lived in the woods with his father, a woodcutter who will not be seen again, and his beloved mother, who likewise is going to be of little assistance. Being a good boy, when Crystal Clearhood was asked by his mother to find his way through the forest alone, to deliver some handmade soup to his grandmother on the other side of things, the dutiful young son gladly obeyed. Just stick to the path and it should be a pretty straightforward trip, said his mother. But Crystal was humming a tune to himself and hardly heard her. Of course, mother, he said, and with his trusty yellow soup-filled picnic basket hooked over his arm, he skipped out the door. Foolishly, he sang his song as he danced down the forest path, and it was easy for every predator in the vicinity to find him. Naturally, the wolf showed up first. Soup, eh? Said the wolf, sniffing. Yes, said Crystal Clearhood. My grandmother has a terrible cold. Luckily, my mother's soup fixes everything. Does it? Said the wolf. But Crystal Clearhood was already too busy singing to hear anybody else, and he skipped down the trail. The wolf watched him go, scowling. Sure like some of that special soup, he said, smacking his lips. And that boy. Slowly, I shut the book. What are you saying? I thought. What are you doing? Why am I here? I was somewhat relieved to hear the old man's voice respond in my head, though his answer was disturbing. The answer to all three, he said with a chuckle, is to die. I responded inside. What is real here? You and me. How did I get here? Honestly, you need to trust me. Do I have any other choice? Good one. I want my life back. Please, look son, we're on an adventure, like those stories you used to read. Remember, a hero wants something. What do you want? To figure this out. So, now you're dealing with me. You'll find your way, kid, I promise. You already know what happens. You're going to set out on a foolish adventure. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to hurt people and be hurt by them. You're going to fail. Wonderful. And you're going to fall in love. Remember, you're going to meet 3 faithful companions who will help you in your quest, though ultimately the final trick must be done by you. What trick? What quest? All I remember of my life is reading books. Where am I supposed to go? Over the meadow and through the woods. He sang these words and trailed off humming. That was the last I heard of the wizard for some time. When I returned to focus on the outside world, I was alone. The overhead fluorescent lights were clicking off, and I heard the pert ticking of the librarian's footsteps. You know the drill, I said to myself. Silently, I slipped the hymnal into my backpack and rose. I tiptoed down the aisle to the reference books. Her ticking heels were getting closer. I turned behind the stack where I remembered the secret seam. The grad student's cart barred my path. So it's today, I thought. I hurried to my corner. The lights went out. The flashlight beam seared into the darkness. Here we go. I backed into the corner and winced. I felt the light on my face. I opened my eyes. Get out of here, said the angry librarian. How could I explain? I tapped the bookshelf, hoping one of those mysterious hands would find me, but the shelf was solid. As it should be, I suppose, I said aloud. Get out, the librarian repeated. I had no idea where I was. These cold city streets could be a forest underneath. My age could be that of my body, or I could be much older. Had I been here before? As I stumbled along the frozen avenue, my hood strings pulled tight against the harsh sea wind, I tried to find my way to my old apartment. The golden reeds of the Back Bay fens greeted me. I would follow this icy path along the park to the cluster of tall apartment buildings behind the baseball diamond. That I remembered. As I looked up at the gray sky, a pair of bulging eyes flashed before me. Just keep going, I mumbled into the wind. I squared my shoulders and pushed against the gale. This has been Animal Songs, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb, produced by Supermoon. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, or at our website, gosupermoon.com. That's GoSupermoon.com. You can also find our work alongside many other talented artists at looksees.com. That's LOOK-SEES.com. This concludes the Bat chapter. I wonder what spirit we will meet next. Until then, thank you for listening.
All I got to say is, glory be, the funk's on me.